Debate, reprise du débat. The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I am honoured to rise today to speak on behalf of Davenport residents on Bill C-29, which would require employees and employers at the Port of Montreal to resume operations. There's currently a work stoppage due to a long-standing dispute between the Montreal Longshoremen Union and the Maritime Employers Union. Unfortunately, this bill is urgently needed. Mr. Speaker, the Port of Montreal is the second largest container port in Canada. Every year, it handles around $40 billion worth of goods. The current work stoppage is causing dire economic impacts in Montreal and indeed across the country. It has health implications and is threatening the viability and reputation of the port. For all these reasons and more is why it is important to pass this bill immediately. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Minister of Labour introduced this bill with a very heavy heart. She is the daughter of a steelworker, and I know she felt it was her last option. And I also know it was our government's least favoured option. We believe in the collective bargaining process. We believe in our workers' right to strike. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, in the heart of my own riding of Davenport, mostly composed of working-class communities with many first-generation Canadians, many of whom are part of a union. Unions protect them, ensure safer and better working conditions, and fair pay for their valuable working contributions. To this day, Davenport continues to be home to working people. I myself am the daughter of working-class immigrant parents. I grew up appreciating the value and dignity of labor and the need for fair, safe, healthy workplaces. There are many unions in my riding that are active and pillars of the community in Davenport, and I just want to thank them right now for everything they do to protect the rights and interests of our workers. Mr. Speaker, in the case of the Port of Montreal, our government has demonstrated our commitment to the collective bargaining process. In this case, through over 2.5 years of mediation, QP Local 375 and Maritime Employers Association have been at the table since September 2018, and our federal government has supported the mediation process since October 11, 2018. Our government provided significant support, making our top mediators available to them to help them reach a new collective agreement, and this amounted to 100 days of mediated bargaining. But alas, Mr. Speaker, very little progress has been made. Both parties remain far apart, and there's now a work stoppage with enormous implications. The broad economic and health consequences of the current work stoppage have left us with no choice but to take this step. I want to echo something that the Minister of Labour said when she introduced this bill. When a work stoppage impacts only the workers and the employers in question, there's no justification for the government to intervene. But in this case, the dire, long-lasting impacts to the economy of Quebec, Eastern Canada, and in the entire country are so severe that the government must protect all the other jobs that are at stake. So, Mr. Speaker, let's talk numbers. Right now, the current strike is halting the flow of around $270 million per week. Economic modeling puts the cost to our economy at between $40 and $100 million per week. The port has experienced a 10% decrease of container volume, estimated to be worth $30 million per week for the month of March 2021 compared to the previous year. The volume of containers arriving at the port bound for the Canadian market has declined by 9% year over year, while the volume of containers bound for the U.S. market has declined by 19%. The work stoppage is paralyzing the port, forcing companies to reroute their supply chains and incurring significant additional costs in the process. In addition, this is happening during a pandemic where businesses are already under enormous economic strain and stress, and this only adds additional unwelcomed pressure at a time where too many companies are just trying to survive. Let me bring it back to my own riding and the people who I have the absolute honor of serving. My riding of Davenport in downtown West Toronto is home to many Portuguese speakers, including those from the Brazilian Canadian community. They and many stakeholders, specifically from the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, have for over a year raised this issue with me of the disruption of trade between Canada and Brazil and the impact to many small businesses here in Toronto and the broader GTA. There are so many other stakeholders, Mr. Speakers, that are being impacted in Canada, including farmers. farmers who've been waiting for seeds and fertilizer, which they really need to arrive on time. It impacts their livelihoods. It impacts our food supply chains and business contracts. There are 19,000 direct and indirect transportation jobs at the Port of Montreal that's being impacted, including rail and trucking jobs. As well, there are 250,000 jobs in Montreal and another 273,000 manufacturing jobs in Ontario that are also very much impacted. Other industries in Canada also depend on the goods that flow through this port. Many, as I've mentioned before, are already struggling to adapt and recover from the COVID recession. The diversion of ships to the ports, including in the United States, could permanently change shipping routes and cut Montreal out of important supply chains for the long term. Canada's reputation as a reliable trading partner is at risk, and the reputation of the Port of Montreal is at risk as well. The work stoppage also has implications for the health of Canadians. And as the minister has mentioned a number of times, right now there are ships waiting that are holding life-saving medicines and medical equipment, some of which is COVID related. And I understand that the minister has heard from many who have said that this strike has life and death implications, with many hospitals waiting for medicines and medical equipment. And let me touch on what are the key things that this bill would do, Mr. Speaker. It will extend the expired collective agreement until a new collective agreement comes into effect. It will prohibit any other work stoppages until the extended agreement expires. It requires the minister to appoint a mediator arbitrator, one who's jointly approved by the parties, or failing that, a neutral person of the minister's choice. It refers all disputed matters to the mediator arbitrator and requires them to attempt to resolve the dispute within 14 days. It also empowers the mediator to resolve outstanding issues through arbitration if mediation fails. And it provides that a new collective agreement becomes binding on the two parties when the mediator arbitrator reports back to the minister. If, on the other hand, the parties reach a new collective agreement before the mediator arbitrator reports back, that new agreement is binding instead. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that there have been a number of objections that have been raised in the course of our discussion over yesterday and today. And I know that one of them is that the government hasn't done enough. And I think that the minister and many of my colleagues from all parties have pointed out, well, particular parties, colleagues from my side of the House have pointed out that we have spent an exorbitant amount of time trying to make sure that we've offered every available tool to allow the two sides to come together. We have offered our best mediators, which has accumulated in over 100 hours of mediation time. We have offered whatever other tools might be available that could be at their disposal. And unfortunately, the two sides are still too far apart. I'd also say to you, Mr. Speaker, that some may also say that this legislation takes away bargaining powers from the parties. And I would say, on the contrary, the parties are still negotiating now, and the minister has strongly encouraged them to reach an agreement before this legislation is passed, because to us, that's the best way to actually reach an agreement. And we know that this bill also contains several key provisions to keep the collective bargaining process going. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill creates a clear path to finally resolve the dispute in a way that is fair and that is neutral. We do not want to disrupt the collective bargaining process. Our government believes that both sides getting together to reach an agreement is one that is good for both of them without the government getting involved. To us, that is absolutely the very best outcome. And hopefully that is where it will end up. I think if circumstances were different, our government would not be intervening. We would let the bargaining process continue. But in this case, unfortunately, the cost of a work stoppage to other Canadians is too great. So our government is introducing this bill to mitigate those harms to other Canadians, to workers, to businesses, and to give the parties a pathway to new and fair collective agreement. I trust that my colleagues in all parties will agree that these dire circumstances leave us no choice but to actually introduce this bill in this House, to have this debate, to have this discussion, to have this vote, and to ask for all sides to say that this is a reasonable step for us to be taking at this point after we have exhausted all other options